Hello?
It had been a while since I'd last seen my Aunt Rachel. Not since my high school graduation 2 years ago. She had moved across the state recently, settling into a cozy little house in a quiet suburb outside of Portland. When she called and said she could use a hand unpacking boxes, I didn't hesitate. I had a few days off from college, and honestly, I could use the break from my own apartment and the noise of the city. She sounded happy to hear I was coming. "You'll be saving my back," she joked on the phone, "and maybe I'll finally get this place to feel like home." I remembered her always being the cool aunt, the one who didn't care if I stayed up late when I visited, who let me watch R-rated movies before I was technically allowed, who bought me my first real sketchbook. When I pulled up to the house, it was just past noon. The sun hit the white paint in a warm way, the garden already looking half-decent despite the move. Rachel came out to greet me in jeans and a faded blue t-shirt, her dark blonde hair pulled up into a messy bun. She looked tired, but that same smile, the one I remembered from childhood, was still there. "Hey, stranger," she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted a second longer than I expected. "You've gotten taller. You've gotten shorter," I teased, and she laughed, swatting my arm like she used to. Inside, the place smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. Boxes were stacked along the hallway and into the living room. A half-unpacked bookshelf leaned against the wall. I noticed a framed photo on the counter. Me and Rachel from my 10th birthday, both covered in frosting. I smiled at it longer than I should have. We started with the kitchen. Rachel directed where things should go, and I unpacked. Plates, cups, silverware, spices. We slipped easily into conversation, filling the space with stories. Her job at the marketing firm she left behind, my classes, our shared annoyance with people who leave voicemails instead of texting. "You remember that summer you stayed with me while your parents went to Europe?" she asked while handing me mugs. "Yeah," I grinned. "That was the year you let me eat ice cream for breakfast." "I was the fun one," she said proudly. "Still am." We moved on to the living room. I unboxed books while she arranged them by color, which I pretended to protest. It was easy being around her, calming in a way I hadn't felt in a while. Around 5, we took a break. She poured 2 glasses of lemonade and sat across from me on the couch. Her eyes lingered on mine for just a second too long before she looked away. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I imagined it. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. "I could have hired someone." "You called me," I replied. "So I came." She smiled again, but there was something softer in it this time. Not the usual joking grin. Something more tired. More real. Dinner was Chinese takeout. We ate on the floor, laughing over fortune cookies and old stories. When it got late, I offered to crash on the couch. She said I could use the guest room if I wanted, but I didn't feel like being alone. Something about the house, the quiet, made me want to stay close. She didn't push. By midnight, we were both yawning. She stood and stretched, her shirt lifting just slightly at her side. I looked away quickly, feeling heat rise in my face. "Okay," she said softly. "Big day tomorrow. More boxes." "Looking forward to it," I said, though I wasn't sure what I meant by that. She walked down the hall to her bedroom, paused, then glanced back at me. "Night, sweetie." "Night, Rachel." Then she disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, and I lay back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. I had come here to help. Nothing more. But something about tonight felt different. Warmer. Closer. Like we weren't quite the same people we'd been that morning. And part of me, A quiet part one didn't want to admit was curious what tomorrow would bring. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting soft lines across the ceiling as I stirred awake. I was still on the couch, a throw blanket covering me halfway. I could hear movement from the kitchen, the gentle clink of cups, the low hum of the fridge door, and then the familiar scent of coffee wafted through the house. I sat up, rubbed my face, and stretched. My muscles were a little sore from all the lifting yesterday, but it felt good, like I'd done something that mattered. Rachel stood at the counter in a gray tank top and cotton pajama pants, pouring coffee into two mismatched mugs. Her hair was down this time, falling loosely around her shoulders, and she looked more relaxed than the day before. "Morning, you survived the couch," she said, handing me a mug. "Just barely?" I smiled, taking a sip. "Still better than my dorm mattress." We ate a quick breakfast, toast, fruit, and some awkwardly peeled hard-boiled eggs, then got back to unpacking. This time, she led me into her bedroom. "I figured we could finish in here before the weekend's over," she said, pulling open a box labeled "Closet Fragile." I hesitated for a second. Her bedroom was warm, with cream-colored walls and soft bedding still slightly rumpled from sleep. I couldn't help but notice her scent lingered in the air, subtle perfume and clean linen. "Sure," I said, forcing my eyes toward the box. We knelt beside it and began taking out items. Jewelry boxes, scarves, a few framed photos. She handed me one carefully wrapped in bubble wrap. An old picture of her and my mom as teenagers, arms slung around each other, beaming. I laughed at their hairstyles. "You both looked like you fought a hairdryer and lost." She chuckled. "That was the summer of Aquanet. Your mom and I thought we were the coolest girls on the lake." As we unwrapped more things, we stumbled upon a velvet box. Rachel opened it slowly. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, a gift from her ex-husband. She held it for a long moment before gently setting it aside. "You ever think," she said, not looking at me, "that life just forgets to give you a second chance?" I didn't answer right away. The tone in her voice had shifted, lower, more vulnerable. "Sometimes," I said, "but I think we notice second chances too late. They're already standing in front of us, and we're too busy looking backward." She turned her head slightly and looked at me, not with pity or nostalgia, but something different, more curious, thoughtful. We moved to another box, this one full of books. Most were paperbacks, dog-eared, some with scribbles in the margins. She handed me a copy of Wuthering Heights. "Required reading," she smiled, "though I never believed Heathcliff was romantic. He was just broken." "I think most people are," I said, placing it on the shelf. A moment passed between us, quiet, unspoken. Then she opened a box filled with clothes. Casual things mostly, but at the bottom were a few folded dresses wrapped in tissue paper. She held up a deep burgundy one, her fingers running over the soft fabric. "Too fancy for dinner alone, huh? You could wear it anyway," I said, not thinking. She raised an eyebrow. "And who would I wear it for?" I didn't answer. My throat tightened a little. I could feel the space between us stretching and shrinking at the same time. "I'm just saying," I finally muttered. "You'd look good in it." She smiled, but it wasn't a teasing one. It was soft, appreciative. The light in the room had shifted by then. Late afternoon coming through the window, warmer now. Dust particles floated in the air, catching the sun. I realized we'd been sitting there for hours, side by side, closer than we'd been in years. Rachel leaned back against the wall, sipping water from her bottle. She let out a long sigh. You know, she said, eyes fixed on the ceiling, I used to wonder what it would be like to start over, somewhere quiet, with someone who actually listened. I listen, I said quietly. She turned her head slowly to look at me. I know you do. And in that silence, I felt something shift again, like the air was holding its breath. She stood and stretched, glancing down at the last few things in the box. Let's finish tomorrow, she said. It's too nice out to stay inside all day. We stepped out to the small backyard for a while, sitting on foldable chairs with drinks. She had changed into a summer blouse and shorts, and her legs were tucked up underneath her. I couldn't stop glancing over at her, and once or twice, I caught her doing the same. As the sun began to dip behind the fence, she stood. I'm gonna shower, she said, her voice a little quieter now. You can grab another blanket for the couch, or the guest bed's still there. I nodded, but my thoughts were elsewhere, because I couldn't shake the feeling that today, in between old books and photo frames, something unspoken had passed between us. Not inappropriate, not wrong, just different, real. And I wasn't sure what would happen next. The evening settled quietly over the house, the kind of stillness that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. The creak of wood under bare feet, the low buzz of the fridge, the soft clink of glass as Rachel set 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. She had changed again after her shower, now wearing a loose beige tank top and gray lounge pants, her hair wrapped up in a towel that she later let down, letting it fall damp and wavy over her shoulders. Red or white? She asked, holding both bottles in either hand. Red feels right, I said. She smiled and uncorked it. The couch was more comfortable than I remembered. We sat with our legs tucked, shoulder to shoulder but not touching. The wine was dry and a little strong, but it warmed the throat. We sipped in silence for a bit, the only light coming from a corner lamp beside the couch. Tell me the truth, she said finally, swirling the wine in her glass. When you were a kid, did you think I was cool or just weird? I laughed. Definitely cool. Like, movie Aunt Cool. Good, she grinned. Because I always thought you were the most thoughtful kid I ever knew. Her eyes met mine. They lingered. I didn't know what made me say it. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the way her voice softened when the sun went down. But I said it anyway. You still are. She didn't reply right away. She just looked down at her glass, then up again, and the way she looked at me this time made my pulse stutter. Cleared my throat. Want me to help with one more box before bed? Actually, she said, setting her glass down and rising from the couch. There's one more in the bedroom I didn't want to move on my own. It's full of books. Heavy ones. Sure, I said, standing too quickly. She walked ahead, and I followed, heart tapping against my ribs like it knew something I didn't. The bedroom was dimly lit, the bedside lamp glowing amber. The box sat at the foot of the bed, unopened. She walked over to it, flipped the top, and pulled out a stack of hardcovers. Can you take these to the shelf by the window? She asked. I took them silently, trying to ignore how close she stood when she leaned toward the bed. We kept working for a few minutes, passing books, organizing spines. Her hand brushed mine once, and neither of us pulled away. The air between us was thicker now, heavier. Then she reached for the final book in the box. It slipped from her grip and thudded onto the floor between us. We both leaned to grab it at the same time. Our hands met. This time she didn't move hers. I looked up at her. She looked back at me, And then, with a slow, almost reluctant motion, Rachel stood up, stepped toward the door, and quietly pushed it shut. The soft click echoed in my ears louder than it should have. She turned back toward me, her face unreadable, yet her eyes said everything. "I thought we were done unpacking," I said, my voice lower than usual. "So did I," she replied. She walked over to the dresser, picked up her wine glass, and took a small sip. Then she sat on the edge of the bed. Her fingers traced the rim of the glass, eyes still not leaving mine. "You've grown up," she said gently. Somewhere along the way, I missed it. I didn't know what to say. My breath caught in my throat. "I didn't think you saw me that way," I said. "I didn't, until now." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was electric. She set the glass down on the nightstand. Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "You don't have to stay," she said. "You can go back to the couch. Pretend this moment never happened." I took a step forward. "What if I don't want to pretend?" Rachel didn't smile. She just looked at me like she had been waiting to hear that all evening. And still, neither of us moved further. We stayed like that, suspended in a breathless pause between what had been and what might happen next. Because now the door was closed, and nothing felt the same anymore. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant tick of a wall clock down the hallway. I stood there, just inside the closed door, the same space I'd helped carry boxes through hours earlier, now feeling impossibly small and charged. Rachel hadn't spoken again. She didn't need to. She sat still on the edge of the bed, fingers loosely resting on her thighs, head tilted slightly like she was studying me. Not with judgment, but with something softer. Curiosity, hesitation. I finally stepped forward and set the last book back on the dresser, letting the silence stretch. The gravity of the moment wasn't lost on me. We were both old enough to understand what this could mean, and what it didn't have to. "You're sure this isn't just the wine talking?" I asked quietly. She let out a small breath. Not quite a laugh, more like release. "I've had one glass, maybe one and a half. I'm very sure." She stood then, slowly. We were inches apart. Her height was just below mine, but the presence she carried was larger than the room. "I don't know what this is," she admitted, her voice quiet but unwavering. "I don't have a name for it, and maybe tomorrow we'll both feel completely different. But right now," she trailed off, looking away for a second. "I don't want to overthink it," I said, "because if I do, I'll probably talk myself out of staying." Rachel smiled, really smiled this time. Not the half-smirk from earlier or the polite one from dinner, but the kind of smile that made her eyes crease just slightly. "I always liked that about you," she said. "You were never afraid to feel." We didn't touch at first. Not physically, but something passed between us, invisible and undeniable. The kind of thing that had been building for years in the subtext of conversations. The long silences, the shared glances during family dinners when the rest of the world faded. "Do you want to sit?" she asked, nodding toward the bed. I nodded. We sat side by side again, as we had on the couch, only this time the distance between us was gone. Our arms touched. Her skin was warm. "I used to wonder," she said after a moment, "what it would have been like if things were different, if I had chosen other paths, maybe married someone else, maybe lived somewhere else. And," I asked, "and I think maybe some moments come not to fix the past but to offer something new." We sat in that moment, unhurried. She leaned her head against my shoulder gently. I stayed still, not out of fear, but because I didn't want to shatter whatever this was becoming. I should feel guilty, she whispered. Do you? I don't know. There was no rush toward anything physical, just presence. Her hand rested lightly on mine, nothing more. It was enough to quiet every loud thought in my head. At some point, the clock struck midnight. She turned slightly to look at me. You can sleep in here tonight, she said softly. No expectations. I searched her face, looking for hesitation, for a sign that she regretted closing the door. There wasn't one. I stood, pulled back the covers, and slid into the bed. She followed. We lay on opposite sides, the lamp still glowing, a foot of space between us. And yet, it was the closest I'd felt to anyone in a long time. Neither of us turned off the light. We just lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, unsure of where this would lead, but aware that something had shifted. And the quiet between us said everything words couldn't. The early morning crept in gently, casting long amber beams through the half-closed blinds. I blinked awake slowly, my body still heavy from sleep but mind alert. The kind of wakefulness that comes not from rest, but from anticipation. I was still lying on my side, facing the wall, covers pulled up just past my chest. Behind me, I heard her shift, a subtle rustle of the blanket, the faintest sigh escaping her lips. Rachel hadn't moved much during the night, and neither had I, but we'd both stayed. That said more than anything else could. Her voice came low, like a thought spoken aloud. Are you awake? I turned slowly to face her. Her eyes were already open. I am now, I said, voice rough from sleep. There was a pause. Then she smiled. It was small, almost sheepish. I half expected to wake up and find you gone, she said. I thought about it, I admitted. But the door was still closed. She let out a quiet breath, a soft laugh tinged with relief. Rachel looked different in the daylight, more real. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes, no makeup to cover the slight tiredness in her face. But she was beautiful in the kind of way that felt grounded. Not performance, not pretending. We stayed like that for a while, just lying there, not quite touching, not rushing. The moment held us like fragile glass, and neither of us wanted to break it. Eventually, she sat up and swung her legs over the edge of the bed. The tank top she wore clung slightly to her back, and for a moment I was lost in the domestic normalcy of it. How familiar it felt to see her like this, like we'd shared mornings before. I'll make coffee, she said over her shoulder. I watched her leave the room before throwing the covers off and sitting up. My shirt was crumpled on the chair where I'd tossed it the night before. I pulled it on, ran a hand through my hair, and followed her into the kitchen. She already had the pot brewing, her movements automatic. When she turned to hand me a mug, our fingers brushed. Neither of us moved away. I'm not going to ask what last night meant, she said after a sip. I tilted my head. Why not? Because maybe it doesn't need to mean anything, or maybe it means too much. Either way, talking about it won't change what it was. I nodded slowly. But it wasn't nothing. No, she said, looking up at me. It wasn't. We stood in silence for a beat too long. I could feel the fork in the road forming between us. Say something, define it, push it forward, or let it rest. She broke the silence first. Are you heading back to campus today? I exhaled. Yeah, I've got a paper due Monday. She smiled gently, but her eyes dropped for a second. Right? I can come back next weekend, I added quickly. Rachel looked up again, surprised. You want to? I think I'd regret it if I didn't. Something shifted in her expression. A softening, a quiet agreement. You'll probably need to help me hang the curtains next, she said, playing it off casually. I'll bring a drill, I smirked. She chuckled and turned back to the coffee pot. When I grabbed my bag an hour later, we stood by the front door for a moment. I hesitated, then leaned in and pressed a kiss to her cheek. She didn't flinch or move away. Instead, she looked at me like she wanted to say something more, but didn't. The sunlight outside was bright and sharp. I walked down the front steps and across the street to where I had parked the night before. As I opened the car door, I turned to look back at the house. She was still standing there, in the doorway, arms folded loosely, her gaze following me like she wasn't sure whether to call me back or let me go. I waved once. She didn't wave back, just nodded slowly, her face unreadable. As I drove away, the radio playing low, I kept thinking about the silence that had filled the house. The kind that wasn't empty, the kind that had weight. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if we'd talk about it again or pretend it never happened. But I knew one thing for sure. The next time I knocked on that door, I wouldn't be just the kid who used to visit.
Bye bye.